On the morning of 26th April, 1999, London froze. Jill Dando, the beloved BBC presenter, a familiar face of news and public trust, returned alone to her home on Gowan Avenue, Fulham. When she reached her front door, her life ended in a single devastating moment. Who could strike so quickly, so precisely, and disappear without a trace? Jill Wendy Dando was born in 1961 in Weston-super-Mare.
I think what set Jill apart was warmth. She was both warm and accessible.
Jill was very much the girl next door. Everybody would have loved to have had her as a neighbour.
This all you got for a coat?
It is. This was my mother's shawl. I've never worn it.
By the 1990s, she had become one of the UK's most trusted faces.
She did news bulletins. She started doing holiday programs. She did antiques programs. She started doing songs of praise. She became one of the BBC's most recognisable and most popular personalities.
She presented programs like Crimewatch, a show about violence, danger, and justice. Her calm voice comforted, informed, and held viewers' confidence.
Let me show you around our new premises. We can now handle more calls than ever, almost 40 simultaneously, with the help of...
Off-screen, friends described Jill as a compassionate, down-to-earth person. She was someone who used her fame for good, for charitable appeals and kindness.
British troops and other soldiers from the multinational force are celebrating Christmas in the Gulf. They remain, though, on a high state of alert as a precaution against an Iraqi military strike.
She had recently become engaged to her fiancé, Alan Farthing, a consultant surgeon.
And she spent a lot of time at his house.
She was selling her house in Fulham in Gowan Avenue, and only rarely went back there.
On this morning, Jill got up and went to Hammersmith to do some shopping. She was seen on CCTV just going about her business. There was nothing unusual. It wasn't that she was followed, and there was no other indicator that she was being stalked or targeted on that morning. After doing her shopping, she made her way to her house in Fulham.
Because she was going to collect some documents which had been faxed to her by her agent, John Roseman.
That morning's return was supposed to be brief, just an errand between busy days at work. It was ordinary and quiet.
It was her intention to go into the BBC offices in central London because she was due to read the news that evening.
Hello, ambulance. I'm walking along Gowan Avenue. It looks like there's somebody collapsed. Confidentially, it looks like it's Jill Dando, and she's collapsed in the door. There's a lot of blood. Oh my God, no, I don't think she's alive.
Don't worry, I'm going to get some help there in some second.
In a quiet London street that reverberated with grief, the questions began to multiply. Why did this happen? And who was the killer?
Good evening. A massive police hunt is underway tonight in West London for the killer of Jill Dando.
She was found slumped and bleeding in her porchway.
For all of us here, it can be grueling coping with crimes against victims who are strangers. It's been almost unbearable dealing with Jill's death.
We always knew her going around, and she's just such a nice person, such a sweetheart, so it's so horrible.
Jill Dando was much more than a colleague. She was everyone's friend.
Simon Basil, a former boyfriend of Jill Dando, doesn't believe it was a contract killing.
She was a very good neighbour, and it is a very shocking thing. It's so brutal.
I cannot understand why they would want to kill somebody as gentle, kind, well-meaning, and as perfect a person as Jill.
The Metropolitan Police say they're anxious to trace a man who was seen running away from the attack moments after it's believed to have happened. He's described as white, clean-shaven, aged about 38, possibly as old as 40, believed to be well-dressed, and was carrying a mobile phone. She was left lying unconscious in the area immediately outside her door, where neighbours found her.
A lot of police turned up very quickly, but by then, who knows who'd been there?
The crime scene and the surrounding streets were chaotic.
Between 11:45 and 12 o'clock, the body of a woman was found outside number 29 Gowan Avenue. That woman has been identified as Jill Dando, the television presenter.
Amid the wave of revulsion and speculation, 7 hours after Jill Dando was murdered, the facts of the attack are sparse.
And there was very, very little CCTV. Nowadays, we take that sort of thing absolutely for granted. There's bound to be something. But there wasn't a lot, and there wasn't a lot in Gowan Avenue. And so you're dealing with an investigation which is quite frail.
The forensic reconstruction painted a grim picture. Experts concluded that the bullet had been fired from a 9mm short-caliber semi-automatic pistol at very close range, with the muzzle pressed firmly against the left side of Jill's head. She was found collapsed against the doorstep, bag in hand, key in the lock. Pathology reports noted a bruise on Jill's right forearm, suggesting she may have been grabbed from behind, forced down, perhaps into a human vice grip, before the fatal shot.
Police are investigating every lead they get from the public. For now, though, the motive for killing one of Britain's favourite TV stars remains a complete mystery.
That method gave the killer 3 advantages: silence, as the shot was muffled by contact, minimal blood blowback, and a rapid exit. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, which implied she was subdued quickly or she never saw the attacker. But what information did the police have to work with? The time it took for Jill's body to be discovered after the shooting was estimated to be between 1 to 2 minutes. Witnesses described only a scream, not the crack of a gun.
At least one neighbour was alerted to the murder by the sounds of the screaming.
She wasn't conscious when I saw her.
Right. So what actually, drew you out to the scene? What got you there? What prompted you to come out?
Obviously I'd heard her screaming minutes before that and didn't think too much of it. Then I heard more people, as in the 2 other people that found her, and then realised that, something a lot more serious had happened.
Mr. Hughes did not hear gunfire, but another neighbour thought she had. The police are still not commenting.
Another witness who was driving a car said they had to brake suddenly to avoid hitting someone who was running across the road. The trouble was, neither of these witnesses were absolutely precise with their descriptions, and nor did all the descriptions match.
It's clear the murder hunt has been complicated because witnesses have given detailed but contradictory descriptions of suspects.
The police are looking at a number of possibilities. They know their witnesses could be confused. But then again, the killer could have an accomplice.
Police quickly discovered the case would be complex. Ballistics suggested the bullet may have come from a reactivated blank firing gun, a tool more often associated with movie sets than real assassinations.
Above all else, the Metropolitan Police say they're anxious to trace a man who was seen running away from the attack moments after it's believed to have happened. He's described as white, clean-shaven, aged about 38, possibly as old as 40, believed to be well-dressed, and was carrying a mobile phone. This afternoon, the police began searching a wide area around Putney Bridge in southwest London after reports, still unconfirmed, that somebody had thrown themselves into the river. In the absence of any obvious motive for the attack, speculation, and it is only that, focuses on a possible stalker.
Jill had a colleague at the BBC called Alice Beer, who again was very prominent on our televisions. And both women received very unpleasant letters containing threats of kidnap and other kind of unpleasantness, which we understand were reported to the BBC, but to this day we don't know how thoroughly they may or may not have been investigated.
The murder of a high-profile public figure triggered one of the largest homicide investigations in modern British history. Known as Operation Oxenborough, detectives interviewed thousands, traced hundreds of cars, and reviewed more than 1,000 statements. The more publicized the case became, the harder it got to whittle down the data. But not all hope was lost. From the start, several theories emerged.
One witness that came forward gave evidence of seeing a man who was sweating quite profusely and appeared to have been running as they arrived at a bus stop. This witness came to be relied upon by the police.
Day 5 of the inquiry and detectives investigating Jill Dando's murder were able today to put a face to the crime with the help of a key witness. Police believe the computer-generated EFIT bears a good resemblance to their prime suspect.
It's from the witness who was at the bus stop at number 389 Fulham Palace Road. This is the man who is described as sweating heavily.
The investigation here has meant some disruption to the lives of local residents, but they say they don't mind. All they want is for Jill Dando's killer to be found and brought to justice.
One theory suggests the killer was a lone stalker, an obsessed fan drawn to Jill's fame, mistaking media familiarity for personal connection. Someone who watched her, waited for her, and acted alone. Another theory points to a professional hit. The close-range shot, modified ammunition, and swift escape have been described by experts as near perfect.
Jill's relationship with Bob Wheaton, her former partner, was looked at very closely, and it was discovered that Jill had given Bob £35,000.
The police were interested in the fact, was it a gift or was it a loan? In other words, did he not want to pay it back, and that was the reason he might have killed her?
It was him who had faxed documents to Jill that she was going home to collect on the day she was shot.
The bullet casing was never recovered, suggesting a revolver or careful retrieval by the killer. This implied the killer was exceptionally skilled, someone calm, trained, and efficient.
Crimewatch had helped to convict Kenneth Noy, a man best known for his killing on the M25, and a very dangerous man indeed. And one of the earliest conspiracy theories was that Noy had instructed a friend, a Spanish barman called Joe, to carry out a hit on Jill Dando in revenge for Noy's conviction.
Finally, there was the political theory. Jill had fronted an appeal for Kosovar refugees shortly before NATO bombed a Serbian TV station. Some believe her murder may have been retaliation, a message from beyond the UK.
This is, of course, the time of the Balkans War, when there were prominent politicians from Serbia, for example, being murdered.
Just 3 weeks before she was killed, she'd done a Disasters Emergency Committee appeal on behalf of victims of the Kosovo tragedy.
We've all become aware of the humanitarian crisis facing the Balkans as thousands of people from Kosovo have left their homes and arrived on the borders of neighbouring countries. This is a massive exodus. Around 600,000 people are on the move.
Milorad Ulimek is a Serbian assassin. He has become one of the Serbian hitman candidates for Jill Dando's killing. But if it was a revenge killing by a Serbian political group, why didn't they claim it?
If there is any thought in that person's head to get in contact with the authorities who are investigating this situation, then I would appeal to them to please not think any further about it, but just to go ahead and give the police any information they can.
And still, the police hadn't caught anybody. The media pressure was intense.
It seemed as though chances of finding a legitimate suspect were thin. But then, a name emerged. The police found a man who fitted parts of the description. He was young, local, and reportedly obsessed with guns. Barry George, a 41-year-old loner living 500 yards from Jill's home, became the prime suspect.
I guess the word is strange. People would say simple, but I would call him strange because simple implies that he wasn't intelligent, but in fact he was.
And they first searched his flat a few hundred yards away from where Jill lived.
They could barely open the door for the amount of rubbish inside. They found piles of camouflage gear, a gun holster,
gun magazines, lists outlining the prices of weapons. There were reels and reels of undeveloped film, which gave up pictures of 419 different women. At one time, he declared himself a national karate champion, using the name Paul Gadd, the real name of Gary Glitter. Then he was a roller skating stuntman under the name Steve Majors, derived from the American TV series The $6 Million Man.
He had a fascination with stalking women. I mean, he had a record of offences against women, sexual assault and other kinds.
Crucially, forensic scientists claimed to find a tiny speck of gunshot residue in the lining of a blue coat belonging to him. Residue that matched that found on Jill's clothing. That tiny particle formed the centerpiece of the prosecution's case.
An identical particle of dust was discovered in a coat recovered from Barry George's flat.
The police and the prosecution placed huge store on this piece of evidence. It was almost their golden nugget.
George is being defended by Michael Mansfield QC. He's pleaded not guilty to murder.
After 4 days of questioning at Hammersmith Police Station in West London, the self-styled Barry Bulsara was charged with murder under his original name of Barry Michael George.
After weeks of legal argument, Barry George arrived at court for the first day of his trial. Also in court this morning, Miss Dando's fiancé, Alan Farthing, and her brother, Nigel, who arrived to hear the opening statement. Prosecuting barrister Orlando Pownall told the court 2 neighbours had seen a man after the killing. He says that man was Barry George.
At an ID parade, witness Susan Mays picked out Barry George as a man she saw loitering in Gowan Avenue on the morning Jill was shot.
Addressing Barry George, Mr. Justice Gage said the jury has found that you shot Jill Dando. On the evidence, it cannot be said to be a spur-of-the-moment killing. On the contrary, there can be no doubt it was premeditated and involved some planning.
We all hope that the trial will act as some kind of milestone for each of us in coming to terms with the enormous loss of Jill.
Nothing could be proved against Barry except that he's vulnerable. We want this conviction overturned and Barry's liberty restored. He is innocent, and it must never become acceptable practice to lock away an innocent person because you can't find the person who's guilty.
On July 1st, 2001, after an 8-week trial, George was convicted of murder. For many, it felt like justice, but others worried the case rested on fragile evidence and a man's history of obsession. The question lingered: was this really the killer? Could the evidence really be trusted?
After he'd served the best part of 8 years in jail, the Court of Appeal decided to look at the case again and decided he should be retried. And that happened in August 2008.
So if you find that particle on clothing, does that mean the person's actually fired a weapon?
Not necessarily. It would indicate that you've either fired a weapon, been in the vicinity of a weapon as it's discharged.
This mannequin on which Barry George's coat was placed had previously had other coats and jackets placed on it.
It's entirely arguable that that gunpowder residue that was found on Barry George's clothing, in Barry George's pocket, might have been transferred there in the crime lab or at another point.
The judges were clear the original jury were misled. It was impossible to know what weight, if any, they'd attached to the FDR evidence. However, it was equally impossible to determine whether they'd have convicted Mr. George if they'd known, as the judges learnt during this appeal, that the particle could just as likely have come from another source as from the gun that killed Jill Dando.
Personally, I felt that without that residue, the rest of the evidence was really, it just didn't stand up.
In August 2008, a retrial jury unanimously acquitted Barry George. But what of the true murderer? With Barry George cleared, the investigation returned to 3 remaining possibilities. Each weighed, each incomplete. The stalker theory faded first. George's behavior was disturbing, but no forensic trace or ballistic evidence ever tied him to the crime. The contract killer theory remained the most technically plausible. A reactivated gun, modified ammunition, a single precise shot with no struggle. It reads like professional work. Yet no client, no motive, and no shooter has ever been found. And the foreign retaliation theory, born from Jill's Kosovo appeal and the bombing of a Serbian TV station, had never been supported by intelligence or evidence. The murder weapon was still missing, the motive was unresolved, and the case officially stays open but remains cold.
The lack of closure around this case means that Jill's name will forever trigger in people's memories that, oh, that's the case they never solved.
So it's always going to be a mystery, and I suspect it's quite likely that we will never see anybody else arrested for the murder of Jill Dando. And that's why it remains one of the most fascinating, mysterious, elusive crimes in modern British criminal history.